a reflection on my grandma. And so that really like shifted the way I carried myself in the way that I want people to know that in all of that sadness and all of that pain, that my grandma, in all of her sacrifice, that she raised a son and a grandson who would be a father, would be a partner, would be all these things that that maybe I didn't have as a young man. So yeah, and so what I like to do when I bring that to good medicine, that's what I'm bringing is my life experience, not only what I learned in books, but it's really like I'm bringing all of that with me as well, in hopes that we can start to have other men want to come to the circle, because it doesn't matter like if I'm not from Standing Rock, or if I'm not from here or there. It doesn't matter, because it's that human experience that we all have in common. And on top of that, alcohol and drugs doesn't care about where we're from. so healing doesn't care where we're from either. It encompasses everyone. So thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I love that. Especially you did the other side, that healing doesn't care where we come from too. That was beautiful. Go ahead, Brandy.
Okay, Coach, your turn.
I gotta follow that up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before you start speaking, I have to say, like, that is what is so rejoiceful, is the energy that you guys both have when you come on. Like, you're like, oh, how do I follow that up? Really? I'm pretty sure you can.
That's right.
Yeah, and all this time working with you, Coach, we haven't really heard like your why either, like why you got into this, that because you obviously have a lot of passion, like you can see it, you can see that intensity in everything that you do. You bring it. So I'm curious about that, and it ties into Brandy's question.
Yeah. So not having a father in my life, that's not his fault. He passed away when I was 2 years old, and my grandfather passed away within that same week, right? And so I didn't know the other side of my like grandparents, right? So I didn't have men in my life. There was women, right? There was my mom, there was my grandma, my aunts, my sister, even my older brother, who's 10 years older than I am, was in and out of prison. So I didn't have, when my father passed away, what that did to my older brother, it just spiraled, out of control. And so, like I said, he was in and out of prison. So, I thank the Creator that he brought coaches into my life when I needed it. And so, the crazy thing for me is that my dad was a coach. My dad was like, running football teams out of East LA in Los Angeles. And he loved sports. He used to take my brother to everything, to baseball, to wrestling, to basketball, right? So my brother went from sport to sport to sport. So when my dad had passed and my mom was moving us back and forth between California and Texas, I wasn't in sports. I wasn't, getting involved. And then we moved to California permanently in 88, and she was working full time, right? So at that point is when I started to act out. I was like, 11 years old. I started to act out. I was looking for something, to identify with. Again, I didn't have a father. So sports is what I was able to identify with. And with that, is where the coaches began to come into my life. And I used to have a coach that would come pick me up for baseball practice. And I would be out there running the streets, and he would just drive into the neighborhood and then find me and say, hey, let's go to practice. And I'd be in, just street clothes. And he had a glove for me. He had a hat. He had all the equipment because I didn't have anything. And so I would just jump in and we would go to practice and, come back. And my mom was like, oh, where you at? I was like, well, it's our baseball. So these coaches began to come into my life. And so I saw that, and that's where I began to again gravitate to the coaches. So I started looking for sports. I started looking for more teams to join, a recreation program, and we had a couple guys in elementary school that like they were our recreation coaches, but they would take us hiking. They would load up the bus, and then we would go hiking. It'd be like 12, 15, of the kids from the neighborhood, never been on a hike. And we live about 3-4 miles from the mountains here in LA. You can drive straight up to San Gabriel Boulevard and get to a mountain, right? Mount Baldy. I mean, you can go hiking, and we had never done that. We had never, experienced that. Or he would take us out to the beach, and here we are, 40 minutes from the beach, and I had never really been out to the beach, and so, so growing up, and as I go through, high school, again, it's just coaches still that are pouring into my life, that are coming in and they're really taking me under their wing, because they must see something that I'm lacking, right? I mean, they're older, they understand, they're working with kids for that purpose. They're working with the kids because they know that they can help them out in some way, because as a coach, you don't make much money. I mean, you pretty much you're paying the coach. When you talk about travel, gas, and all that, I mean, you get a stipend of $1,000 at the end of a basketball season. Like, you're paying the coach. And so, I had two important coaches that came into my life in high school, and which were Gary Arona and Wallace Gonzalez. And Arona was Wallace's baseball coach in high school. And so they came with that same idea of, I'm a pour into youth. And they came to the high school, and they went to San Gabriel High School, where, again, it was, when I got there in 94, I mean, there was every street gang, open campus, there was, fighting Asian gangs fighting Mexican gangs, and white kids fighting Mexican kids, and black kids fighting Mexicans. And it's just like, this was all going on, and we had to avoid all of that, growing up and walking through the streets, because they used to bus us from one community past 4 high schools and take us to San Gabriel High School. And so I never quite understood that. And it had to do with, like, gang territory and where you come from, and the neighborhood. You couldn't really go to this other high school because that was a different territory. And so even like thinking about that, they would move around kids from the neighborhoods to avoid them from going into different territories. And so, a lot of the times, they asked me if I was like gang banging. It's like, well, you do it to survive. You had to fight, you had to scrap, you had to, you had to run, you had to get jacked a few times, that just to know that you were in the neighborhood. And, you couldn't walk down the street by yourself, because you would fight for no reason. And so if it wasn't for those coaches coming into my life and taking me out of all of that, and one coach sat me down and said, hey, you know what, you're good enough to play college sports, and I was 17 years old at that point. I didn't know what I was going to do. Once I graduated, I was a 1.7 GPA in high school. They're ready to kick me out there, but I was just kind of like, just right above the line to be able to participate in sports, you get the naysayers that say, hey, you ain't gonna be nothing, growing up. You're gonna be knucklehead. You're in and out of, getting suspended here at school. You're fighting all the time. You're not gonna be much, if you keep heading down that direction. And so those coaches that stepped in and took me under the wing and, got me out of the neighborhood and moved me up to Santa Clarita. I went up to Santa Clarita for a year to go to school, just opened my eyes up to like what's out there, what's outside of, my little bubble, my neighborhood bubble here in LA, where we grew up, and they were going to gangbang, you were going to die, you're going to be locked up. And those were your options. And again, my older brother, who's in prison, my younger brother who was killed in a car accident at 17, so those are the things that I knew, and so I was next in line. That was my thought process. I was next in line. So with those coaches coming into my life, and that's where that passion comes from. That's where that love comes from. That's where community comes from, is those coaches took me under the wings and showed me, what coaching is really about. It's not about the money, it's about what you're doing for an individual, and you work with, 40, 50 kids a year, but there's just that one that needs to hear you. There's that one kid that needs to hear that things are different. Things can be different. And so that's how it all got started with the inception of coaches, and why, I love coaching and working with youth, working with families, or just being in that environment, just because, again, what was done for me when I was a youth and even as an adult is I just, in return, I want to give that all back.
Okay, thank you. I was thinking that as you were speaking, I can see why you stayed in Indian country as long as you did, because you definitely have a story that connects with a lot of our youth here. And I could see why you gravitated towards our young people here. And just thinking about the importance of coaches even in my life, not that I was in sports, but my kids, they were in youth wrestling. And I remember a lot of the connections that they made with their coaches and how important that was. And then also within my work, a lot of what I look at when I have young people are struggling is it sports season? What sports are they in? Because I don't have to worry as much, like if it's basketball season and they're in basketball, because that's really a big source of strength for them during that time. But then if it's that off season for them, then sometimes they're not feeling that sense of purpose. And then that's when I really need to be on it and reaching out. So thank you. I really appreciate you sharing all that. I think we can circle back to Lori, because I feel like Coach and Carlos really kind of talked about their why. And so I want to hear yours, Lori, about why you do this work.
Thank you. I was going to be like, me, I want to say that too. So listening to you both, Carlos and Zeke, you're my why. 28 years as a school counselor in a variety of different school settings. Too many kids didn't have anything, and they had too much pain that they didn't have a place to process it. Zeke, when you said that you hadn't been, hiking, some of the kids who come to Camp Monique, I think one of the ones that you came to, this is when it became really evident for me. We had people at our legacy training who lived in inner city LA, 7 miles from the sand as the crow flies, and had never touched the sand. Right. And so for me, and then in that same 100-person middle school camp, we had Stevie Wonder's son who'd been around the world on private jets. The disparity between opportunity and what we have as a skill set to manage through hardship and come out the other side. And then the obligation for people like you guys said, your coaches, like Zeke, you said, for us, we have an opportunity, every one of us, to be somebody for somebody. And I just think that there's so much finger pointing. It's your job, it's their faults. I'm like, no, we're human beings, and all these precious, amazing, creative young people are not being heard in the world because they don't have the skill set to say, I matter. Listen to me. I have something to contribute. They have all that, but then there's this system of suppression that so many voices don't get heard. And I watched that happen for 28 years in school. And about 10 years ago, I decided that what I was doing at school sites for the kids I could serve, I needed to do bigger, because schools should be fun for kids. Every kid should have an opportunity to find themselves and their unique brilliance, should have an opportunity to step powerfully into their future and do something with that brilliance. And so often they can't find it. And not because it doesn't exist, because the opportunity doesn't exist. And I'm not really sure where that settled for me, but I think I was 11. I think I was really young.